That's a degree 1. If you had 10x squared minus 5x minus 3 equals 0, there is a degree 2, because the highest degree of the exponent is a 2. Degree 1, because that's an understood 1, right? So polynomial equations have a degree of 2, or you can call them squared, right? Okay, so in order to solve them, we want to write the equation in standard form so that one side of the equation is equal to 0 or it has a 0, right? Then we're going to try to factor the polynomial. After you factor the polynomial into two different factors, or two different things that multiply times each other, then each one can be set equal to 0. We'll see why. Then you'll solve each of those two because you changed it into 2, and we will check the solution. That sounds like a lot, but we're going to go over each step of it a couple times, okay? So why, after we factor it, do we set each of the pairs equal to 0? Because of this rule. If A and B are real numbers, and if A times B equals 0, then A equals 0 or B equals 0, right? So there's no situation where you have 5 times Y equals 0, right? There's no other number that Y can be except 0. So we can say if 5 times Y equals 0, Y equals 0, right? And then pretend we don't know 5 either. If X times Y equals 0, then you can say X is 0 or Y is 0. And that or means we can do both of them. We can say X is 0 and Y is 0. Those are two different answers, right? Because there's no number you can multiply by X to get 0 except 0. There's no number you can multiply Y by except 0 to get 0. That's what this means. So if we have X minus 4, that's just our first term, being multiplied by X plus 2, and those are equal to 0, that means that this has to equal 0 or this has to equal 0. Don't worry about the or, we're just going to say they both are true, okay? So once you have, what we've done is wrote the equation in standard form so that one side is 0. Then we factor the polynomial completely, which is what this whole unit has been about. Once you've factored the polynomial, you can say that this factor is equal to 0 and this factor is equal to 0, because one of them must be 0, right? The only way to get 0 when you multiply is to multiply by 0. Now you just solve it. Add 4 to both sides, and we get X is a positive 4. Subtract 2 from both sides in this case, and we get X is negative 2. So that's what I mean by there's often two answers. Here, X is equal to 4 and X is equal to negative 2, because negative 2 plus 2 will be 0 and positive 4 minus 4 will be 0. You can even plug them back in. So we said X is 4. That means 4 minus 4 times 4 plus 2 equals 0, right? 4 times 4 is 0. 4 plus 2 is 6. 0 times 6, right? Because that means multiply. 0 times 6 is still 0. 0 equals 0. So that one's true. And X equals negative 2. So same equation, X minus 4 times X plus 2. So now we have negative 2 minus 4 times negative 2 plus 2. Good. Negative 2 minus 4 is a negative 6. Negative 2 plus 2 is a 0. So negative 6 times 0 is 0. Negative 6 times 0 is in fact 0. So for both of those, we made a true statement. So that is how you're going to find that's how you're going to solve a polynomial equation. Factor it out, which is the hard part, which is what we've been practicing this whole time. Once you have the factors, set each factor piece equal to 0 and solve. So once you get here, you just say x is 4 and x is -2. Substitute each x back in, and they will make a true statement. All right, here we have x squared minus 5x equals 24. Good. So our first step, remember, is to put it in standard form. This is not yet in standard form. Standard form means it's equal to 0. Right now it's equal to 24, so I'm going to subtract 24 from both sides. There's no space to stack it, right? Because it's not like any of those other ones. So I'm just going to say x squared minus 5x minus 24. Equals 24 minus 24 is 0. So I have put it in standard form. Writing sideways, I apologize. All right. Before, well, I mean, it doesn't matter for this example, but before you would put it in standard form, you would simplify it. So if you had any like terms to collect, you would do that now. If you had any parentheses to get rid of, you would do that now. Good. So standard form means it's not factored and it's set equal to 0. Good. Next, the hard part, factor the polynomial. This is what we've been working on this unit. Good. So we have x squared minus 5x minus 24. That means our a is just 1. So we need to find two terms that multiply to equal a negative 24 and that add to equal a negative 5. So you see as well, negative 24 and a negative 5. If it's a negative 24, that means one factor is going to be positive and one is going to be negative. If it's an addition, it will also add to a negative number. So that means that your negative of the factors is going to be the bigger number. For example, negative 24 would be 1 and 24, right? But one of them needs to be negative for us to get a negative 24. If the answer is also negative, then we want the bigger number to be the negative. 1 minus 24 is a negative 23. 2, if I took 24 and divided it by 2, what would I get? Don't hesitate to use your calculator, right? So, and you can even type it in as a negative. Negative 24 divided by 2 is negative 12. Again, I'm going to make the bigger number my negative because I want, when I subtract them, to get a negative number. So negative 12 plus 2 is a negative 10. Negative 24, can I divide it by 3? This is how I do it. I just go all the way down the list. So negative 24 divided by 3 is a negative 8. Negative 8 plus 3 is a negative 5, is it not? So the reason I made the bigger number negative is so that I would get a negative answer when I combined them by adding. Good. So my two terms are, remember, we're not factoring by grouping. Because the a is 1, we just go straight to x plus 3, x minus 8. Keep that equal 0. So that just gets carried down. Good. So x squared minus 5x minus 24 becomes x plus 3 times x minus 8. You can refactor that to make sure, refoil it to make sure that you are correct. X times x is x squared. X times 8, negative 8 is negative 8x. 3 times x is positive 3x. Positive 3 times a negative 8 is a negative 24. These two become the negative 5. So you can refactor it just to check, but you know that these factors are good. All right. Now, set each factor equal to 0. So solve each binomial, we'll say, by setting it equal to 0. So we have x plus 3 times x minus 8 equals 0. So we're just going to say x plus 3 equals 0 and x minus 8 equals 0. Good. If I subtract 3, I get x is negative 3. If I add 8, I get x is a positive 8. Good. You can put that back into x plus 3 times x minus 8, or you can put it in right here. So you can say -3. -3 squared minus 5 times -3 is a positive 24. And our other one was 8. So this was 8 squared minus 5 times 8 is also 24. Sorry about the glare. So you can always check your answer. Check that it's a true statement. So we are just taking what we learned about factoring and applying it to polynomial equations to solve for x. Generally, you get 2 answers, okay? Example 3, 3x squared minus 29x minus 30. Can you divide anything out of this? Well, you know you don't want to put it in factored form. Well, yeah, you do want to put it in factored form. So this is already, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Step 1 was make sure it's in standard form. So before, if it's not in standard form, make sure it's unfactored. Once you have it in standard form, then you start factoring it. And factoring sometimes means you take out, like if this was a 3, a 21, and a 30, I could take out a 3, right? So it's okay to factor it that way too. You don't have to factor into 2 binomials. You might be able to just take out an x. Good. All right, we cannot do that, so we'll go on to factoring. And it looks like it's going to be a binomial, right? So we need to multiply it to equal a times c and add to equal b. B is a -29. And a times c is 3 times 30, so -90. Are there any numbers that multiply to equal -90 and that add to equal -29? Well, what are my factors of -90? And it's a negative, so just like up here, we want our bigger number to be negative. So we have 1 and -90, right? You can't, yeah, you can. You take -90 and you divide it by 2. I know this is a lot of work with the big numbers. And you get -45. If I subtract those, I don't get 29. If I divide it by 3, I get 30, right? Just like 3 times the -30 originally. So 3 and -30. If I subtract -30 plus 3, it's not -29. I can divide it, I can't divide it by 4, but I can divide 90 by 5. -90 divided by 5 is -18. And if you'll notice, now -30 was kind of as close as I got, right? -45 plus 2 becomes -43. -30 plus 3 becomes -27. And now I'm getting a smaller number, right? 18 minus 5 is just -13. And this one is -89, right? So I missed my window of -29. So we're just going to call this prime. I cannot factor this. I cannot solve this for x by factoring. Good. All right. Example 4, because this is not yet in standard form, right? I said put it in standard form. And putting it in standard form means doing the factoring. So get rid of the parentheses. If it's not in standard form, we get rid of the parentheses to put it into standard form, which I know because we're adding parentheses, right? we're factoring it, and technically this is a factored form, but we need to expand it. So we need to do the x times 5x and do the x times the -7 so that we can move this -2 over and we have a trinomial. Good. And then we can take the x out again if possible. So if it's factored but not in standard form, you need to do the work to get it all the way into standard form. No parentheses. Good. All right. So x times 5x becomes 5x squared. X times a -7 is just -7x. And then we have equals -2. So I'm just going to move that -2. And what I get is 5x squared minus 7x minus 2 equals 0. Good. If this was already set equal to 0, that's a different situation. Then you can just say x times 5x minus 7 equals 0. Now you've skipped over standard form. Now you can go straight to it's factored. So it's just x is 0 and 5x minus 7 equals 0. So you see the difference? If it's already equal to 0 and factored, then you get to skip all the way to the end and just say x is 0 and x equals -7/5. Okay. But if it's not set equal to 0, you have to factor this and move that so that you have it like this. All right. Okay. So we have it in standard form by getting rid of the parentheses, moving the -2 over to, oh, sorry. Did anybody say that? Did anybody try to tell me? It's +2. By getting rid of the -2, by moving the -2, I need to make it a +2. Good. All right. So if I'm going to now factor this, just do what we have been practicing all of this unit. Okay. So we're going to multiply to equal a times c, add to equal b. A times c is +10. So it's going to multiply to +10 and it's going to add to a -7. Right? All right, what are my factors of 10 that could give me a -7? Well, if it's a positive that I'm multiplying to get to, but a negative that I'm adding to get to, then I'm only going to use my negative factor pairs. So -1, -10, -2, -5. That might be it. But luckily, -2 plus -5 gives me -7, right? So because a was not 1, a was a 5, right? That means that my a comes down and my c comes down, and then my b is split into the -2 and the -5. So -7x becomes -5x, looks easier to work with the 5x, and -2x. Okay. So anytime that your a is not 1, you cannot, right? You cannot go straight to parentheses. Or was that nice? It was on the other side of this. You can't go straight to parentheses. We go straight to parentheses when our a is 1. If this is not 1, for example, here it's 5, then you go to factoring by grouping. So it's a whole nother step, just to clarify. I think we've all practiced that enough, but just important to keep things clear. So let's keep going. Now we're factoring by grouping. 5x squared minus 5x. I'm going to divide that by 5x. Good. That's my factorization. So if I take 5x squared and I take out 5x, I'm just going to have an x. If I take -5x and I take out a 5x, I'm just going to have a -1. Here I have -2x plus 2. Remember, if that's a negative, this number is going to be a negative. -2x and a +2, I can factor out a -2. So this is going to be 5x times x minus 1 minus 2. -2x divided by -2 is just a +x. And then a positive 2 divided by a negative 2 is a negative 1. Good. And we've done factoring by grouping, so you know what to do next. We have factored out the x minus 1, and we are left with 5x minus 2. Good. So there's a lot of factoring steps. And remember, I apologize. Remember that this is all still set equal to 0. Should have been. That's very important. Difference today is that those were expressions in previous units and now, or in previous lectures, now it's an equation. So we're going to take that x minus 1. There's one more step, right? X minus 1 is 0. X is a positive 1. 5x minus 2 is equal to 0. Add 2. 5x equals 2. Divide by 5. X equals a positive 2/5. So for this answer, we have x is 1 and x is a positive 2/5. Good. Put either, well, both, each one at a time. Put 1 times 5 times 1 minus 7. Make sure you get negative 2. 2/5 times 5 times 2/5 minus 7. Make sure you get a negative 2. But those are your answers. Okay. All right. Example 5 looks a lot like example 4 in that we have parentheses, but it's not set equal to 0. So we are going to distribute the 4x as our first step. We're going to put it into standard form. 4x times 8x. 4 times 8 is 32, right? 32. X times x is x squared. 4x times a 9, so 4 times 9 is 36. They were both positive. And then you have 1x equals 5. Now I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. 32x squared plus 36x minus 5 equals 0. Good. Now we're going to factor it. It's just so big. We have to do multiply to equal 32 times a negative 5. We get negative 160, right? So it's going to multiply to negative 160, and it's going to add to equal 36. So think about 160. You could even think about 160 as 16, right? So you have, it's a negative 160, but it's a positive 36. So I'm going to take make the smaller number my negative. So negative 1, positive 160, right? 16 divided by 2 is just 8, right? So negative 160 divided by negative 2 is just going to be a positive 8e, add a 0. 16 divided by 3, I don't think I can do that. 16 divided by 4 is 4, right? So I can say it's a negative 4. Negative 160 divided by negative 4 is a positive 40. 40 minus 4 is 36. Again, keep your first term, 32x squared. Keep your last term, negative 5. Keep your equal 0. And then that positive 36 becomes a positive 40x minus 4x. 36 is 40 minus 4, but now I can factor by grouping. Good? All right. So 32x squared and a positive 40x. I know I can divide them by x. What's something that is common to both 40 and 32? I can take 40 and I can divide it by 4, right? Can I take 32 and divide it by 4? Ooh, yes, I can. Can I take 40 and divide it by 8? Can I take 32 and divide it by 8? So what I tend to do, if they're both even numbers, I think, okay, I can divide them by 2. What's 2 times 2? It's 4. Can I divide them by 4? What's 4 times 4? Can I divide them by 8? What's 8 times 8? Or what's 8 times 2? 16, right? So we're just trying to go up in the even numbers to see the highest number I can divide both 32 and 40 by. Good. You can't divide them by 10. 32 divided by 16 is 2. And 40 divided by 16 is not a whole number. So I'm going to say it's 8. Good. 32x squared plus 40x divided by 8x. That means I have an 8 here. 32 divided by 8, I know we've done it, is 4. X squared divided by x is still going to leave us with an x. Good. And then 40x divided by 8, 40 divided by 8, just so we're not confused, is a positive 5. X divided by x eliminates the x. Good. All right, and we've got our other one. This is a minus, so we're going to call this a minus. We have negative 4x minus 5. I don't think it has any common factors, right? So we just have to call it a negative 1. Negative 1. Negative 4x divided by negative 1 is a positive 4x. And then negative 5 divided by negative 1 is a positive 5. Good. Now we've done factoring by grouping, so we know we just take that 4x plus 5 and we multiply it by 8x minus 1. If that was equal to 0, that is now equal to 0. 4x plus 5 is 0. That means 4x is a negative 5 and x is a negative 5/4. I know some people are even faster at that. I'm not. I like to do it step by step because I always make mistakes. So you're going to subtract whatever you're adding, and then you're going to divide whatever you're multiplying. And then we have 8x minus 1 is 0. 8x is 1. And then x is 1/8. So we have a negative 5/4 and a positive 1/8. You can check it as well. All right, example 6 is a little bit different. We have 3x cubed minus 12x equals 0. So it's already in standard form because it's set equal to 0. Now, I said we get rid of parentheses to get it into standard form, but once you have it in standard form, if it's a trinomial, it's often, you can turn it into a binomial, as we've been doing with, or two binomials, sorry, like we've been doing with all these other examples. So we said x squared minus 5x minus 24 equals x plus 3 times x minus 8. But if you have a variable in all of your terms, you can factor out that variable, just like we do when we are doing factoring by grouping. So 3x cubed minus 12x, they both have an x, and you can divide them both by 3, right? 3 divided by 3 is 1. Negative 12 divided by 3 is a negative 4. So instead of getting two binomials as my factors here, I'm just going to factor out one variable. I'm factoring out the variable 3x. 3x cubed divided by 3x is not a 3, is just x squared, right? Negative 12x divided by 3x is a negative 4. If that's equal to 0, this is also equal to 0. Good. So it's a perfectly legitimate way to factor. We have 3x and x squared minus 4. They're both multiples that equal 0. So that means we can say 3x is 0, which just means x is 0, because if you divide both sides by 3, you get rid of the 3 on this side, and 0 divided by 3 is just 0. Good. And then over here we have x squared minus 4 equals 0. Again, we're just going to solve it. So we're going to subtract 4. Or sorry, add 4 to both sides. X squared equals 4. Good. Okay. Remember, this is squared. Get rid of the squared. You have to take the square root. And anytime you take the square root, you put a plus and a minus in front of those possible answers. So the square root of x squared leaves you with x, plus and minus the square root of 4 is your answer over here. Because anytime you take the square root, there are two different numbers that if you multiply them by themselves, they'll give you a positive 4, right? It could be -2 squared, or it could be +2 squared. So we have to take the positive and the negative version of those answers. Positive 4 squared and -4 squared. 4 squared, as we know, is 2. So we have a +2 and a -2. Don't worry that this doesn't have an answer, right? That's not what we're doing. The negative is in front of the radical. So we solve for the radical. The square root of 4 is 2. So we take a -2 and the +2. Okay. So all of your answers are, you can put them all in a row, -2, 0, and +2. You can put each of those in and make sure they give you a true equation. Good. Also, if you know the difference of 2 squares, right? This is the difference of 2 perfect squares, which was from Wednesday. So the equation for the difference of 2 squares is a squared minus b squared equals a plus b times a minus b, right? And our a was x and our b is 2, right? Because that's the difference. A squared means that a is x because a squared is x squared. B squared is 4, so the square root of 4 is 2. So that means x squared minus 4 is x plus 2, x minus 2. If we solve for that, we still get x is equal to -2 and x is equal to +2. So if you saw that, that's also fine. That will give you the same 3 answers. The 3x is outside, so that'll give you the 0. And then the x squared minus 4 becomes x is -2 and x is +2. Or you can take the square root of plus or minus the square root of 4. Either way. Okay, here is a real life example. A rocket is launched from the ground. Its height in feet at time t is approximated by the equation h equals -16t squared plus 112t. So based on this, if I know how many seconds it's in the air, I can figure out how high it is at that point, okay? Find out how long it takes the rocket to return to the ground. How long means time, right? So they're saying find t when it returns to the ground. Returns to the ground is related to this one. How long is this one, right? So we're finding t when h is on the ground. Remember, h is height. What is the height of the ground? I know. Height when it's on the ground will equal 0 feet. Good. So they want us to find t when h equals 0. 0 equals -16t squared plus 112t. Good. So I'll just rewrite it just like that. When h is 0, when the feet high is 0 feet high, what is the number for the time? High. Good. All right, so it's already in standard form because h is 0. 0 equals -16t squared plus 112t. I can factor out a t, can I not? So it's in standard form. Now you want to put it into factored pairs. There's only 2 terms. So if you can pull out a variable, that's great. -16 and 112. Can we take 112 and divide it by 16? Oh, you can. It's 7. Good. So -16t squared and 112t, you can factor them both by 16. You can either, oh, sorry. You can either make it a -16 or a +16. Okay. -16t. -16t squared divided by -16t is just going to give us t, right? 112t divided by -16t, we said 112 divided by a -16 is a -7. Good. T minus 7 equals 0. Good. Now I have, oh, sorry, it's over here already. Now I have my 2 factors. I have 0 equals -16t. I'll solve that for t. Divide by -16, divide by -16. Remember, 0 divided by anything, even if it's a negative, is going to be 0. Sorry for that shade. So 0 equals t. Good. Or t minus 7 equals 0. That means I'll add 7 to both sides and I'll get t as a +7. Good. And just to prove to you that it doesn't matter whether it was a -16 or a +16, I'll write it again over here as -16t squared plus 112t, because I kind of don't believe it. We'll make sure, right? And we're going to divide it by a +16t. 16t, -16t squared divided by divided by +16t is just going to give us a -t, right? And then 112t divided by +16 is going to be a +7 equals 0. So 16t equals 0 is still going to give us a t equals 0, right? And then -t plus 7 equals 0. I'll subtract the 7. So it's -t equals -7, but then I have to divide or multiply by a -1. And I get back to t equals 7. So you get the same, apologies, you get the same 2 answers, whether you divide it by a negative or a positive of that number, because if it's a positive, then your t is negative and your 7 is positive. If it's a negative, your t is positive and your 7 is negative. So it solves itself. All right, last 2. Don't worry, you don't have to learn or memorize any theorems from geometry, but this is saying in a right triangle, the sum of the squares of the lengths of the 2 sides is equal to the square of the length of the hypotenuse. So sum, remember, this is like the very first thing we did in this class. The sum is like translating English to math, right? The sum of the squares means we're taking it and we're multiplying it by itself, of the lengths. So this is length 1. I guess it has to be length A. The lengths are these 2, right? The sum of the squares of the lengths is equal to the square of the length of the hypotenuse. So this length squared and this length squared added together is equal to this length squared, is what they're saying. Good. Okay, so the way we write that, a squared plus b squared equals hypotenuse squared. We call it a squared plus b squared equals c squared, just knowing that c is always your longest. Good. All right, find the length of the shorter leg of a right triangle if the longer leg is 10 miles more than the shorter leg and the hypotenuse is 10 miles less than twice the shorter leg. So all of this to say what this is already describing, right? So longer leg is 10 miles more than the shorter leg, right? The shorter leg is just going to be x. the shorter leg of a right triangle. The longer leg is 10 miles more than the shorter leg. The hypotenuse is 10 miles less than twice the shorter leg. Okay, that's how they got these numbers. But that's just reviewing what we did at the beginning of the semester, just practicing translating from English to math. So don't overthink that. And remember, the formula is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where this is going to be a, this one's going to be b, and this one's going to be c. It doesn't matter whether that's a or b. This could be b and this could be a. It is important that the long one is c. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Good. And then we're just going to take that. If a is x, right? A squared becomes x squared. B squared becomes x plus 10 squared. And c squared becomes 2x minus 10 squared. Now, because it's not yet set equal to 0, we have to factor all of those out. All right. X squared, that's just a single term, so we can just call it x squared. However, here, x plus 10 squared is not x squared plus 10 squared. It is that quantity times itself. Okay. Always remember that when you see it. Same here. Another opportunity to practice that. 2x minus 10 times 2x minus 10. Good. All right. Let's just practice FOILing. X times x is x squared. Tell me when I make a mistake. X times 10 is 10x. 10 times x is 10x. And then 10 times 10 is 100. Those are all positive. 2x times 2x is 4x squared. 2x times a negative 10x is a negative 20x. Negative 10x times positive 2x is another negative 20x. And then negative 10 times negative 10 is a positive 100. I ran out of room. Good. All right, let's combine like terms. We have x squared plus x squared becomes a 2x squared because we're just adding, we're not multiplying anymore. We're just combining like terms. Good. 10x and 10x become 20x. And then you just have that original 100 equals 4x squared. Because it's the same variable raised to the same power as the 2, I'm going to make them both the same color. Negative 20x minus 20x, negative 20 minus 20 is a negative 40, right? We're just combining, we're not multiplying. And then plus 100. Good. Now you want to set it equal to 0, and I like having my first term being positive, so I'm going to move the 2x squared because it's smaller. So if I take 4x and I subtract 2x squared, I'm still going to get 2x squared. Good. And then you can keep going. So this is already my 0 side. So I'm going to subtract 20x. Subtract 20x. That's actually going to get bigger because negative 40 minus 20 is a negative 60x. And then positive 100. So I now have to subtract 100 because I'm trying to get this equal to 0. Right? So I cancel that, cancel that, cancel that. This was 100. This was 100. They cancel. So I have 0 equals 2x squared minus 60x. Don't worry, we're closer than we look. That was a lot of work. Now you don't need two binomials. I know that 60 can be divided by 2 and that x squared and x have a common factor of x. So I'm going to call this 0 equals 2x times the quantity. 2x squared divided by 2x is just x, and then negative 60x divided by 2x is negative 30. Good. So I have 0 is 2x. So that just means x is 0, right? Because 0 divided by 2 is 0. And I have 0 equals x minus 30. I'll add 30 and I'll just get x is positive 30. Good. I have 2 answers, but because it's a word problem, I only want to, or I want to make sure that they make sense, right? So is this leg of the triangle equal to 0 miles or 30 miles? Probably only 30, right? Because if it has a length of 0, it's not going to be the side of anything. So this leg is 30 because x is 30. This leg is 30 plus 10 or 40. And this leg is 50, 60 minus 10. So make sure you go back and, oh no, it only asks you to find the shorter leg. Don't worry about it, but it might ask you to find all the legs. So once you know x, make sure it makes sense in your story. And then if they ask you to find all 3 sides, just put x here, x plus 10 here, and 2x minus 10 here. Make sure you apply it.